Despite repeated threats from Moscow, Finland is looking to join NATO, and Sweden is ready to follow suit. Russia's invasion of Ukraine prompted the decision. The addition of Finland would effectively double the length of NATO's land border with Russia. In Finland this morning, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and a delegation of GOP senators welcomed the country's leaders to the alliance. Imtiaz Tyab is standing by in Helsinki with more on this. Imtiaz, good morning. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and three other Republicans met with the president of Finland this morning. He is urging President Biden to name Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. I know you asked the senator about that. Let's watch.
You are calling on President Biden to declare Russia a state sponsor of terror. Can you explain why? And Mr. President, do you also agree that Russia should be declared a state sponsor of terror and why?
Well, first, the president has within his authority to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. Anyone who's been able to observe the events of the last couple of months would have to conclude that Russians certainly deserve to be included on that list.
Imtiaz, how did Finland's president respond, and has the administration responded?
Hey, Nikki, good to talk to you. You too, Anne-Marie. Well, the Finnish president really tried to avoid answering that question, it has to be said. Very clearly, he doesn't want to be a leader to basically call Russia a state sponsor of terrorism, especially at a very delicate time for his country. Finland, of course, changing its position of essentially neutrality, specifically when it came to Russia. It always had its own sort of very Finnish relationship with Russia, for lack of a better phrase, and of course is now joining NATO. So it really didn't want to answer that question. But when it comes to support stateside for what Mitch McConnell is calling for, there's bipartisan support for this, very rare bipartisan support to get President Biden to declare Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. And that would be pretty significant. The only other countries that have that designation are Cuba, North Korea, Syria, and Iran. So it would be pretty significant for this to happen to Russia. Now, will it happen? Well, it's still a big question mark. But when we consider that President Biden was very comfortable describing Vladimir Putin as a, quote, war criminal, there's a possibility he may be willing to do this as well. Anne-Marie, Nikki.
So you were at a press conference with the Finnish president and the prime minister. We already know Moscow has said there will be some form of retaliation, right? But the Finnish model had always been to be neutral in terms of military allegiance, but not in terms of everything else. And Finland has been moving closer and closer to Europe. When you ask them about the possibility of the possible implications of joining NATO, not just angering Vladimir Putin, but also now, you know, if they're approved, they have to actively participate. They have to, you know, provide troops and military support for NATO. What was their reaction?
Yeah, you're right, Anne-Marie. And they cited Article 5, which essentially means, you know, attack on one NATO nation is attack on them all. And that is something that the Finns took very seriously. And as you rightly point out, although Finland has always had a very unique and separate relationship with Russia, it has been moving much, much closer to Europe. It's been part of the European Union since the 90s. It has been working with NATO for just as long, but was never formally part of it. But I think a few things have happened, but perhaps most significantly, public opinion has changed here. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, only around 20% of Finns thought joining NATO was a good idea or something they even needed to do. After the invasion, that number is now 75%. And that really just opened up a political pathway for the president and the prime minister to move forward with this decision to join NATO. And they've been very clear. In fact, not only did we speak with the president and the prime minister, who think this is a good move for the country. It's an important move. They're very concerned about Russia's behavior with Ukraine, and they're certainly concerned about their own future as a country. But when I was speaking with earlier today with the defense minister as well, he said, look, we as a country, Finland, we don't take decisions rashly. We really think of these things through. And this is something that they have, as a nation, have thought through, including the potential threat from Russia. And I asked them, well, you know, the likelihood of tanks rolling over your very very long border with Russia may seem small, but there's other ways that Russia can attack you. It can be through cyber warfare and the like. And he said, we are prepared for that, and we are bracing for that. So Finland taking a very clear view of this decision to join NATO, which is a very big move as well, a significant expansion, which again, as we've been saying, will see NATO's land border with Russia increase by over 50%. Anne-Marie, Nikki.
Yeah, it's incredible. Certainly a critical addition to NATO. Imtiaz, Moscow, as you know, has threatened possible retaliation over these NATO applications. How concerning is this?
It's always a concern when a country, especially a country like Russia, which essentially has been isolated because of its invasion of Ukraine. It's stretched because of its invasion of Ukraine. It's been economically punished because of its invasion of Ukraine, for it to essentially make broad threats. And, you know, you hear from, Russia's essentially their ministers who have been in sparring matches with counterparts in other countries. And all of it just really sort of ratchets up the tensions. But again, when it comes to this part of the world, and when it comes to the calculus here, one of the questions we asked was about the nuclear threat. Russia has, since the very start of its invasion of Ukraine, dangled the threat of some sort of nuclear action. And when we asked the Finnish Prime Minister what she thought about Russia's threat of some sort of nuclear reaction, she said, this is why we're joining NATO, because NATO has nuclear weapons, and that if, again, Article 5, an attack on one NATO country is an attack on all NATO countries, and Finland at least is seeing it as part of their strategic reality in order to be part of this. And as well as talking about Finland, we also need to talk about Sweden as well. This is a country which for over 200 years has taken a position of neutrality. It, like Finland, wants to join NATO as well, very much making decisions to do the same thing this week as Finland is. And so this expansion of NATO, which is something that Vladimir Putin certainly doesn't want to see and is quite frankly incensed by, is very likely to move forward.
Imtiaz, I want to ask you about a report that I heard today, but I don't know if you can speak to it or not, that Russia actually halted electricity exports for a couple of days to Finland in reaction to this announcement. And I was just sort of curious, other countries have been hesitant to be critical of Russia because they're so dependent on oil and gas. Do you know, what Finland's situation is, whether or not that electricity disruption was a problem for them, or could it be a problem in the future?
In short, it's not a huge problem for Finland. Russia only provides around 10% of Finland's electricity. So for Russia to stop those supplies, it's really more of a symbolic move to, quote, punish Finland. But it's not really something that's going to dramatically change the situation. We have to remember, economically, Russia and Finland had very close ties. They, again, share a very long border. Finland's border with Russia is very close to St. Petersburg, where Vladimir Putin is from. There's a lot of commerce between these two nations, a lot of economic ties, and that has really slowed down because of Russia's invasion and indeed because of the coronavirus pandemic. But it's going to be very hard to see that kind of economic freedom and movement in the way that we've seen in the past start up. But Russia is saying that they will try to punish Finland and indeed Sweden as well, and really sort of suggesting that there could be some sort of military punishment, but being very kind of vague and somewhat opaque about that as well. Anne-Marie, Nikki.
Imtiaz, thank you.